Welcome to What the Health? Where anything health is fair game as we tackle the trends and bust the myths about health and wellness. Here are your hosts, Dr. Dan and Angela Turo.
Welcome to another What the Health podcast where anything health is fair game. I am Dr. Dan here with
Angela Turo with Turo Family Chiropractic. Before we get started, I got to do the obligatory disclaimer just to let you guys know this podcast is for information and discussion. Trying to get people thinking about health is no way intended to replace your individual medical advice that you talk about with your particular healthcare provider. So get that out of the way, and now we can get into another one of our favorite topics, which my favorite topic, sugar. And
is every one of our topics our favorite topic?
I know. I think so far. so far they're all our favorites.
All right. So we're going to talk about sugar today, and this is probably going to be several episodes long. But the importance here, we need to understand. There was an article in the New York Times, and they were actually quoting the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, and I got to quote this article. An analysis published in the Journal of American Medical Association predicts that 32.8% of boys and 36.5% of girls born in the year 2000, so all of those individuals are turning 22 this year, will develop diabetes during their lifetimes. That's incredible.
A third.
That was over 20 years ago that study took place. Over a third of girls and boys will develop diabetes in their lifetime. So that's why obviously the importance of this topic of blood sugar and how it relates to our health and physiology. But as we always like to do, or at least as we're starting to get into the routine of, we have to understand how is blood sugar impacted, because is sugar important in our diets?
In what? Depends who you're asking.
Depends on who you're asking, right?
What form of sugar?
Sugar is a necessary ingredient in our diets because it is so important in really energy production. Through at every cell, and we're made up of 70 plus trillion cells that were estimated. So again, sugar is very, very important at the cellular level, but obviously, with a statistic like that, we are going to have we are massively over inundated with sugar. Yes. So, but let's get to the bottom of this. When you eat something, let's use something simple like an apple. Okay, you take a bite of an apple, chew it up. Swallow it, gets down into the stomach, broken down by some enzymes. From the stomach, it's passed into the small intestine. The small intestine is where approximately 90% of all nutrients from your food are absorbed into the bloodstream. Okay? Now, no ingredients that you digest are utilized in the blood. They're actually utilized at the cellular level. The blood's responsibility is to take those ingredients from the digestive system to our 70 trillion cells that make up you and I. So with that being said, you choke that apple, gets down, starts breaking down in the stomach, gets to the small intestine, and broken down into small little sugar molecules, and those sugar molecules make their way into the bloodstream. Then a biochemical neurological signal, it recognizes that our blood sugar has started elevating a little bit, and now boom, there's a molecule that is released from our pancreas, little funky looking organ right next to the stomach, that releases a hormone called insulin. Okay, so that insulin then is released from a neurological biochemical pathway, released into the blood. And why is insulin important? Because sugar cannot get into the cell without insulin opening up channels, okay, to be able to move insulin from the bloodstream into the cell itself. So we have to understand that sugar is important because it's necessary for energy production in the cells. Insulin is important to help get that blood sugar into the cells. It's when we have too much blood sugar that we end up having a problem. So, Angela, you are the expert in dealing with sugar, it being your favorite topic, and you talk to people every day about sugar. So, talk to me, what's your experience been with people and their sugar metabolism, working with them?
Well, and I thought it was interesting because that's what you asked, is sugar important? And I said, depends who you ask and depends what kind of sugar we're talking about. So you picked a great example of an apple, but generally when we're talking about sugar and the overconsumption of sugar in this country, we're not talking about people binge eating apples on a daily basis. So unfortunately what has happened, and because you talked about how that apple is broken down and there's lots of steps to it, there are also a lot of other things in an apple. There's other nutrients, there's fiber that's going to slow the digestion, that breakdown. The problem is we have shifted towards away from eating things like that, those natural sugars that our body knows how to break down, knows the proper balance, knows how to go through that entire process that you just explained. And now we have this inundation of the added sugars, the processed sugars, the highly refined sugars that get broken down very, very quickly. So that whole process that you just described, as opposed to that maybe taking a little bit of time to get through your digestive system, if you eat something, just pick a piece of candy, something like a sweet tart, that's straight sugar, you're going to get that instant spike in your blood sugar. You're now going to basically kickstart that whole process, going a lot faster than is naturally intended. And then we're also eating so much of it and so often. So, if you think back to when we ate 3 meals a day, back to when breakfast, lunch, and dinner used to be the standard, there wasn't really snacking, there wasn't, this just kind of constant intake of food. Our bodies were able to handle whatever we ate at breakfast, whatever we ate at lunch, whatever we ate at dinner. But we're now, first of all, starting off with these sugary cereals, sugary breakfast foods, just what is marketed as breakfast food. That's a whole nother, that'll be a whole nother podcast, I'm sure. What is marketed as breakfast food in this country is just downright criminal, in my opinion. But
breakfast bungle. Call it the breakfast bungle.
Stay tuned for the breakfast bungle. So we're starting our day with sugar. We're going and getting our sugary coffees. We're going and getting, just all day, every day, eating this constant intake of that refined sugar. So that pathway you just described that is so natural, that knows exactly what it's supposed to do, is now in hyperdrive, and it keeps happening. The insulin has to get released more frequently. It releases more of it because what's going to happen is over time, those receptors that kind of, you were talking about, I don't know if you refer to it that way, but the lock and key kind of, the insulin opens the lock to open the cell. So over time, the cell's going to stop responding to that. So it's going to send more insulin to try to get that cell to open up, to get those blood sugar levels down. And essentially, just like, we talk about, drug addiction, it's not like it's the first time that you're addicted. You start taking a drug and it feels good. You start taking more and more of it, but eventually you need more. You need more. You need more.
To get the same response.
And that is exactly what's happening with that insulin. It's not, the original amount is not enough to open the cells to get the blood sugar down. So we need more and more and more until we eventually hit that point of what we call insulin resistance, which is actually what we're concerned about when we're talking about type 2 diabetes, not the blood sugar. The blood sugar is the symptom.
Yes.
It is the insulin resistance where we essentially have broken the ability of that pathway to work the way that it's supposed to, which is why we see the increase in blood sugar. But unfortunately, just like everything we talked about in the cholesterol podcast, how the signs of heart disease start years, decades before we actually see the outcome, and the same thing's happening with that blood sugar. By the time you're seeing that spike in blood sugar, you have already damaged that process, damaged that pathway. And
so, and I think I wanted to go back, a second for what you talked about, the different types of sugars. And, a lot of the artificial, and a lot of people are very familiar with the term high fructose corn syrup, right? Because that's probably one of the most, well-known artificial sugars that's out there. And when you break that down, it actually has, 2 sucrose molecules. So it's broken down much faster. So an analogy that I always like to use, when you eat something like an apple, that's used in your body and burned like coal, right? So, if you think of charcoal on a grill, it takes a while to get that charcoal going, but once it goes, then it burns very slow, very steady, very methodically, versus, you eat something like peppermint candy or something, and that's the lighter fluid on a fire, and it's like whoosh, and it just goes up real quick and then gone down. The problem is we don't necessarily just use a little bit of lighter fluid. We don't have one peppermint candy. We have a handful of peppermint candy. So it's like we keep dousing that lighter fluid on the fire, and if you keep doing that, you keep adding fuel to the fire, then eventually you're going to have some damage, right?
Yeah,
and that's what we're looking at, the difference between the types of foods that we eat. So, so as Angela mentioned, you have now, we start to get into the pathophysiology, or if we have too much, if we're over inundated, we're getting too much sugar, we have to look at what happens at the cell. Okay, so you have the receptor, which is that's the receiver. That's what actually gets the message of insulin, and it recognizes that insulin is floating around in the blood. Insulin grabs onto that receptor, sticking up like a hand or something, like if you were reaching up from a lower level and trying to grab someone above you. That hand sticking up is the receptor, and the insulin grabbing onto that receptor is what allows the cell to open and become permeable to where the sugar enters the cell. But as Angela mentioned, insulin resistance happens, when that receptor is overstimulated. So I always use the example. I used to, give some, I would give health talks to our patients coming into the office, and just use some different analogies. And so I would have one person be a cell, and I would have them hold their hand out and that was the insulin receptor. And so what I would do as insulin is I would keep smacking that insulin receptor, And so as the cell, you start to get annoyed, right? Because you keep getting that overstimulation of that signal. Very annoying, yes. Right? and as a younger sibling, you can really relate.
I'm having all kinds of childhood flashbacks right now.
Don't worry, her therapy bill is not covered. So anyway, you get annoyed because we keep smacking that insulin. We stimulate that insulin receptor. So you as the cell being annoyed by that because you're being overstimulated, and maybe to the fact that you also can't handle any more sugar coming in because you're already maxed out, you start going through a process called down regulation. And this happens in so many different neurological, hormonal, immune pathways in the body, and it happens at the cellular level. There's things called upregulation when receptors are added to the cell membrane, and then downregulation, what I just mentioned, is when receptors are brought back into the cell. And that happens because there's an overstimulation. The cell is overexcited, so it says no more. It's going to start downregulating. And you have to understand, there are thousands, probably in the hundreds of thousands of receptors on each cell. So let's say it starts down-regulating those receptors by 20%. Well, now the same amount of insulin, as you just mentioned, is not going to open up that cell. So now you need more insulin. So now the pancreas starts producing more insulin, but you're already annoyed. The cells are already annoyed because there's too much insulin overstimulating it. So over time, and again, it doesn't happen overnight, it's 5, 10, 20 years down the road, now those cells are continuing to downregulate their insulin receptors, and they're becoming more resistant to insulin because it doesn't have the same signal. So the same amount of insulin is not producing the same result. So now the body produces more insulin, and it continues what we call this vicious cycle. So that's where the pathology, that's where the process of type 2 diabetes comes from.
And that's why we see the high blood sugar when we look at those blood sugar levels.
Exactly, because now the same amount of insulin, it's not stimulating the cells to open up because the cells don't have the same amount of receptors. So yeah, that sugar that needs to get into the cell to be utilized, it has nowhere else to go. So it just hangs out in the bloodstream, and now we have this high, blood sugar level. And unfortunately, if that sugar has to go somewhere, so a lot of times it'll start ending up in other tissues. If it ends up in a joint, it could cause joint inflammation, and you could have some sort of rheumatoid or arthritis type condition. If it ends up in the brain, it could start to impact brain fog, right? How many of us have this brain fog because so you start to go down the path of if it gets in the muscle, you have muscle soreness, right? So you start going down the path of what happens if you have too much elevated blood sugar for too long, and you start looking at all the signs of symptoms of that elevation, and the massive impact that it has on your system. It really diminishes your body's ability to perform at its best. So what do we do about it now is the question.
and again, my question is, depends who you ask. Depends on who you ask.
So let's start with the medical management. What does medicine do, right? We talk about pathophysiology, or the pathogenic solution. That's the medical management. You go see your medical doctor. They take your blood test. You got elevated blood sugar. What's the management now? What do we do?
They're going to put you on medication. So that's been my experience. So they see a symptom. They want to treat the symptom. So we see high blood sugar. We want to get that blood sugar down. Or worse, we see insulin not working correctly, so we want to figure out a way to fix that. So I know metformin's the big one that everyone seems to talk about.
What blows my mind is that, and you've seen this too in clinical practice, is that we're seeing younger and younger individuals being put on this.
People our age. I mean, that's younger. Younger. Oh, I know. I forget we're not as young as we think we are. Shoot, I always forget that.
I've seen young women in their mid-20s, put on this medication.
You brought up the statistic, that from 2000 where they said, those kids kids born in 2000, a third of them, so like you just mentioned, they'll only be 22 this year. I guarantee some of them already are diabetic, if not pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
And that's the scary part. That's really the scary part.
And so here's the deal. Science knows that this is not a quick process, right? It happens over time. So, so now the medical management is, well, if we can get these blood sugar levels under control before the insulin resistance starts, that's where, say, well, let's prescribe this medication, because now, just like we talked about...
This is sounding very, very familiar to...
Right?
I feel like we just talked
about this in the cholesterol podcast, but it's you start to look at, well, how can we artificially manage and get that blood sugar down? So now there's this quote unquote wonder drug in metformin, and it works on a couple different levels. Primarily working in the liver to where it down regulates or slows down the process of glucose production. Okay, basically the majority of your liver stores are stored in the liver as glucose or glycogen. I'm sorry, glycogen. So it's just glycogen is basically just a string of sugar molecules put together, and the majority of your glycogen is stored in the liver. The second, most stored is in the musculature. But what metformin does is it helps to slow down the process of releasing blood sugar from the liver. Okay, and that's all well and good, but the problem is, if we keep eating sugar, it has nowhere else to go. Now you're taking a medication. It doesn't want to be stored in the liver. Okay, so now again, it has nowhere else to go except the bloodstream.
Yeah.
So that's the medical management. And again, if this process then again prolongs and you've got this vicious cycle and it goes on long enough, then what happens is now you start getting into the insulin resistance, because that blood sugar remains high enough in there. But and then if it gets bad enough, they want to get rid of metformin, or in addition to metformin, now they want to put more insulin in your system.
Which we just talked about.
We just talked
the mechanism's
about
not working
the
correctly.
body is already producing more insulin. You're resistant to it. So what you're doing is by adding more insulin to the system, you're signaling to the cells that it's overstimulating, and you're signaling to the cells that they say, no, there's too much. We're going to start down-regulating. So you're viciously creating this cycle to perpetuate itself and just continue to lead to more resistance, right? So you're not solving it.
Correct. And just to clarify, we're talking about type 2 diabetes, which is the insulin resistance type of diabetes. So we're not talking about type 1 diabetes, which they used to be considered juvenile diabetes versus adult onset. But again, unfortunately, we're seeing kids now with type 2 diabetes, and juvenile diabetes can be developed into adulthood. It's really the mechanism behind it. So with type 1 diabetes, your body does not produce insulin. So it is a different type of issue. So yes, people who have type 1 diabetes absolutely need to have insulin because their body is not producing it. So just because I know we sometimes we say diabetes in general, we are talking about type 2 diabetes and that mechanism.
Yes, insulin resistance diabetes. And so you're perpetuating the problem when you give a type 2 diabetic insulin. But what happens? Why would we improve or increase insulin in the system when we know that the insulin resistance is the problem? And time for my favorite time of the episode, follow the money. Oh my goodness gracious. So here's the deal. It's all about the money, right? We follow the money. If we can get you addicted to our sickness illness continuum, right? There's no money in, you're going to talk about in a minute here, what you can do to help reestablish homeostasis and health in your body naturally without any medications, okay? The pharmaceutical industry, okay, the titans, the big pharma titans, don't get rich off of you taking control of your health. They get rich by keeping you sick. And the sad, unfortunate thing is that they know this. They know how the pathophysiology works. They know that by giving you insulin, that perpetuates the problem. It doesn't give you a solution. And that is just so sad because, as we talk about all the time, you have to become your single greatest health advocate, and you get that way by asking more questions. So how do we solve this from a health perspective, not a medical management? If you want to stay in the vicious cycle and stay in the rat race, you take metformin and you take insulin and keep eating the same diet that you had, and you're never ever going to get off of that wheel, and it's just going to continue to get worse. So how do we actually solve the process? Because here's the thing. There's a lot of people in science world that say, in the science literature, that say diabetes type 2 is not curable. I think that's BS. What do you think?
Absolutely. That is absolute. Again, we are talking about a failure of a natural mechanism, a natural pathway in the body. And there is absolutely no reason that if caught early, if treated properly, and when I say treated properly, I'm not talking medical treatment, I'm talking you as a person treat your body properly to fix that. There is absolutely no reason you can't reverse that. There's no reason that you can't be able to get that pathway working. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to be something that is going to be a one-time fix, you clean up your diet and then you're good forever? No. And that's really what it comes down to. Is we talk about the pathogenic model, which is what Dr. Dan was just talking about with we're sick, medicine is given to treat that sickness, and that is the model. Pathogenic is looking at disease and what causes disease, and it's going to treat what they think causes that disease or is going to treat the symptoms of that disease. What we practice and what we believe is a salutogenic model. So salutogenesis is looking at factors that promote health and wellness. So we're not looking at the absence of disease as being the same thing as health. You cannot have any quote unquote disease, but that does not necessarily mean you are healthy. So we want to focus on the things that are going to get you healthy. And spoiler alert, they are going to be the same things that will go with most of the topics that we discuss. But this topic so specifically because what you eat and how you move and when you move and how much you move, all of those are directly going to impact that pathway that we just spent time talking about when it comes to your blood sugar and your insulin. So number one thing, that's why I joke, it truly is probably the thing I talk about most. I can't say there's really a day I go that I don't talk about sugar, but...
Yeah. So let's pause real quick, because that's just so important to reiterate that there is a difference. And I know I talk to people when they come into our office and, they're just in this health crisis, or, they're like, maybe they have like one or two things going on, but they don't even realize how really like, a crisis. They're the Titanic heading towards the iceberg, and they don't even realize it. And then we start looking at, things like infrared thermal scans, where they have massive deviations, and those infrared thermal scans are a reflection of autonomic distress. And autonomic distress can come from, too much blood sugar and other biochemical dysfunction. So, we're looking at so many different things, and someone comes in like, oh, I got a little bit of a headache, or, I'm just tired. So, what do I do? And they think, it's going to be a simple solution. But then we start looking and reading into their physiology, and we realize they're a Titanic about to hit the freaking iceberg. Now what do? It's not just a quick fix, as you said, because it's probably 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years that they've been going like that. They haven't been symptomatic at all, or maybe just a little headache here or there. I love the term normal headaches, right? People say, I just have a normal amount. What's a normal amount of headaches? Like,
that's one of my favorite things working with people, and when I get to help them clean up some of their different parts of their diet or lifestyle that they maybe didn't even know was wrong, then all of a sudden people say, I didn't know how bad I felt until I felt good.
Exactly.
And that is really, because I think you and I both went through that at different points, and I know I went through that with my own health at times, where it's like you get into a state where you're used to kind of having a headache, you're used to having aches and pains, you're used to being tired, and you don't realize that that's a product of our lifestyle. We've just gotten used to it and we accept it, and then when you start to change that, it's like, wow, this is crazy that I was living that way for that long.
So then you have this choice. I always talk about it being the fork in the road, okay? And we use this thing in our office called an illness wellness continuum, right? So, you have the comfort level is 0, right? So that's where, everyone's just kind of comfortable. Maybe you're a little symptomatic here or there. Below is where you go -2 down to -10, okay? That's where, health crises start to show up. -10 is, severe disease and you're on your deathbed. But I would say the majority of America functions between a 0 and a -6, I would say, on average. But then above that health line is 0 to +10. See, most people, they come into the office and they think 0, I'm asymptomatic. I don't have any major issues other than maybe a little fatigue, a headache now and again. They think they think, hey, I'm healthy. I don't have any, diagnosable disease. But then we start to show them, all the possibilities. They didn't even realize the top half of the spectrum of the continuum from +2 up to +10, which is optimal health and function. They didn't even realize that existed, because they thought, hey, we're trudging along at a plus or at a 0, okay, or even -2, and they think, hey, that's okay, because that's how I'm going to live my life. But now we're at this fork in the road, right? So they come in and maybe something, maybe a headache showed up, or a neck kink, or or they got a blood test back, and it's like, oh, my cholesterol, my blood sugar is a little elevated. Now what do? Okay, so now we're this Titanic heading towards the iceberg. We've got decision time, right? So either you're going to go down the pathogenic model, okay, and that toolbox is drugs and surgery. That's the toolbox of the pathogenic model. And please understand, as Angela and I always talk about, we're not bashing that model, okay? In emergency situations, the pathogenic model can save lives. The problem is if you apply the drugs and surgery model You cannot, okay, we look at the illness-wellness continuum. You cannot go up the illness-wellness continuum. Go from a -2 to a +2, go from a 0 to a +6. You cannot go up that illness-wellness continuum by staying on drugs and surgery. You might be able to stay where you were at, but as we learned before, chances are the toxicity of medication buildup is really going to not keep you where you're at, but slowly degrade your health until you're down, down, down. And then again, what's our life expectancy? It's going down now, right?
Exactly.
So either you're going to stay in that model, the illness wellness pathogenic model, or you have to make the decision of, no, I'm going to function in the salutogenic model, in the model that is going to facilitate and work with my body in how it is designed. And we believe that our body is designed to heal and be healthy. We just have to give it the right model, the right solution. So with that being said, and helping to draw that depiction, what do we do? Someone comes in and they have elevated blood sugar and they just found out about it and they're in their 30s. What do we do?
Well, the number one thing, which is what we started out saying, is you gotta stop putting it in your body. I know we have created such a connection to it in this society. And yes, food is absolutely something that should be enjoyed. It should be part of celebrations. It should be part of life. Of course, like we should never telling somebody not to ever eat. I would never tell somebody don't ever eat sugar ever again, because
I think I just had a cookie before this
He actually literally just had a cookie before this podcast while we're preparing for the sugar podcast.
It was the last of the holiday cookies.
So I would never say that to somebody. But what you really have to understand is what your day-to-day looks like. And that's really the biggest thing, is sitting down. How often are you eating sugar? What are the hidden sources of sugar? Because that's the big thing. Because I have people come in and they're like, oh, no, I don't really have much of a sweet tooth. And they start describing what they eat on a day-to-day basis. And I'm like, that's a sweet tooth. Because they're eating things like refined grains. They're eating a lot of white bread. They're eating
muffins.
They're eating their muffins.
It's a grain muffin.
They're eating bagels for breakfast. I'm like,
cake with jelly.
Yeah, I'm like, just things, or like the fruity cream cheese that's loaded up with sugar, yogurt that's loaded with sugar, cereals.
You just got creamers and coffee.
Oh my gosh! I said one of these days we're gonna do a podcast with me sitting at Dunkin' Donuts, just yelling out the calorie and sugar content of every drink that people order, because some of those drinks, honest to God, have more sugar in one drink that you should be having in a week. And I say that in a week.
Wow.
And there's in one drink that people are drinking in one sitting.
Yeah.
So,
and you have these 16, 17, 18-year-olds thinking it's cool.
Oh yeah, I used to get the Frappuccinos all the time at Starbucks. I mean, that was every day after school. Oh yeah, go to Starbucks, get the Frappuccino, and it's just like you think back on it, and you still see people eating that way, and it's just really taking control, like we were saying, taking control of your life and your health and looking at what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And we always talk about you're never stagnant. You're either moving towards health or you're moving towards illness. So you have to look at your day-to-day. Is it saying that every single day you're going to make 100% perfect decisions moving towards health? No. But you want that to be the general trend. And guess what? If you take care of your body, then it can handle the cookie. Exactly. It can handle. Exactly. So that's the thing, is really looking at reducing that intake. So checking labels, checking what you're eating on a day-to-day basis. I always tell people, if you're eating things that primarily come in a box or a bag, they prepackaged with a label on it, right off the bat, you're probably getting more of the refined and artificial and added sugars than you think you are. Because 95% of packaged products, 95% have added sugars in them. So unless you are preparing all your meals at home fresh, which I get in this day and age, in this country, that is very, very difficult to do. But that is really making sure you're checking labels, making sure you're really getting that sugar intake down. And again, not just going for the obvious. Yeah, we know candy, cookies, cake, ice cream. Of course, we know that stuff. I'm talking about looking at fast food. All those fast food restaurants, they have sugar in the buns. They put sugar in their salads. They put ketchup. Oh my gosh, ketchup. Wasn't that the number one vegetable consumption for kids was ketchup. I don't know if it still is. I remember the one year.
Well, I think that it gets considered a vegetable under like the USDA guidelines for school lunches, which is sickening.
Yeah, so that
I love ketchup, by the way. I absolutely love ketchup.
But that's the kind barbecue sauce, isn't all those condiments. So that's where it's just
energy meal replacement bars.
Oh my gosh, yeah, those breakfast bars, energy bars, protein shakes that have pretty much anything that comes in a package that has some kind of sweet, like, birthday cake, chocolate chip cookie dough, it has added sugars in it. Yeah. So it's really about, again, being mindful, checking, really just checking those labels, being mindful of what you're eating that stuff in moderation. But the biggest thing that you can do is break the cycle. So break those, because you're going to have cravings. If you're someone who's been eating that typical, what I call the standard American diet, if you start cutting that stuff out, you are absolutely going to have cravings. So it's getting that under control so that you are in control, so that if you eat a little bit of sugar, you're not overdoing it. You can eat a cookie and move on. You're not eating an entire package of cookies. Yeah.
Well, and let's pause right there, because that is so important to understand, because you mentioned it's so difficult, in today's day and age, and but again, we're making excuses, right? And I'm not saying, because if you were diagnosed with severe diabetes or severe, stage 3-4 cancer, you're going to do everything you can the majority of people are going to listen to whatever their doctor tells them. If they have to take a certain amount of chemotherapy, they know their hair is going to fall out. They know they're going to lose their eyesight if their blood sugar stays that high. Their blood pressure. They're going to do everything that the doctor tells them to do. So that they don't go to the deathbed.
Exactly.
Okay. But now here we are saying, look, we have a solution before it ever has to get that way. But what do? We typically use convenience as an excuse. And again, trust me, I'm saying this from experience, because I know how difficult it is to do that. But if we really look at it, this is our health we are talking about. It is our single greatest asset. So we have to, like you said, be mindful of how can we make a difference. And if we truly want to get healthy, we have to make those choices. The 90% choices that are going to move us towards health, and celebrate now and again. But if you
have to make them now. You have to make them now.
Correct.
It's just that. I mean, we were talking about, yes, you can reverse the effects, but it is we say it's so much easier to prevent things than to treat them once they're there.
It's easier to raise healthy kids and young adults than recover sick adults.
Absolutely. And actually, I sports medicine background, we always talked about prehab is a heck of a lot easier than rehab. So take care of yourself, prevent the injuries, prevent the disease. That is going to give you not just the best quality of life now, it's going to improve your quality of life now, and it's going to give you those longer years.
Well, yeah, and again, we talk so much about prevention, but prevention is still, in my mind, it's still in the pathogenic model, right? Because you're in this comfort zone, and what are you doing? You're making decisions based on fear of preventing an illness, which is from a pathogenic model. Whereas, no, I want to be as healthy as I can, right? I want to perform better. I don't want that headache. I don't want that brain fog. I want to think clearly. I want to have good, healthy discussions and good, healthy relationships with my family and friends. I don't want to snap at my spouse anymore because I'm angry and agitated and irritated. I want healthier relationships. I want to move healthier. I want to go out and take a hike. I want to, be able to breathe better, not feel like I'm out of breath when I get to the top of the stairs. Those are all better performance. That's the salutogenic model. What can you achieve versus, the pathogenic model? What am I preventing? What am I trying to avoid?
And what's great is if you live in the salutogenic model, you're going to get both. You will get both the increased quality of life now, the increased ability to perform and live, and we always say thrive, don't just be alive, thrive. And then you're going to have that while also preventing those future complications down the road. And the diet, when we're talking about blood sugar, that is so important. And there's that we'll do a whole other podcast on this, but fasting is a big one that we'll talk about, and that's single-handedly one of the best things that you can do for disease prevention, toxic clearing, cellular regeneration in general, but especially when we're talking about blood sugar.
Well, and that really blew my mind, because when I started learning about fasting, it's probably been about 4 or 5 years ago now. Again, the overall the science behind it, everyone says, "Oh, you're starving yourself," and I grew up, and you and I both were in that that performance athletic model. Like, why would you gotta eat? You gotta eat. Hey, you just did your workout. Gotta get your pre-workout in.
Gotta get your post-workout protein.
Get your post-workout in. You gotta eat. 6 times a day. Like, and it's like, when you start to look at not just the science in the past 50, 100 years, but you look at again, we talk about our ancestors and ancestral living. How did our ancestors evolve? They evolved by they'd go out and kill a buffalo as a tribe. They'd all inundate on that buffalo meat and bone broth and stuff over and wipe that buffalo out over a week, and then they might go a week or two before they ate again, and you have these cycles, and again, winter versus summer, with the seasons, there's cyclical eating. I was just blown away when I started looking into the healing benefits, and it makes so much sense, right? Because if we're giving our body sugar, and not just sugar, but like food, because if you're already in a toxic state, you can eat protein and spike your blood sugar.
Yep.
If you are toxic and you eat a protein, boom, your blood sugar can go up. And that's why you see a lot of these high protein diets.
Yep.
But you're giving these high protein diets to people who are already dysfunctional, and they're never gonna recover their blood sugar. But what's the solution? Stop putting food in. All sugar, fat, protein, just stop. And now you actually give the pathway a chance to rest.
Take a breath. Yeah.
And it actually gets a chance to heal itself. It's amazing that when you do that, then the body knows what to do with it. It's programmed to do that.
And we'll get way more into that when we talk about fasting.
Fasting's a whole other podcast.
But it's such an important part of that overall health management, blood sugar management, and then exercise is the other really important component. Again, we sit way too much in this day and age, and it's just, again, we use the convenience. It's so hard. It's not so hard. I mean, it's not so hard. I get it. I've had desk jobs. I've quit desk jobs, to be honest. That was the first thing I said to you when we were talking about. I'm like, nope, I am not taking a job where I have to sit at a desk all day. But the idea of a lot of that blood sugar regulation also comes with exercise, because again, what we were talking about there's 2 ways with the blood sugar. It either gets put in the cells for storage or it gets transferred to be used immediately. So if you're eating more sugar than you should, but you're using it, that's also going to help with that regulation. And it's not going to be the answer. You can still out-eat. You can definitely still out-eat a good exercise regimen. But if you are somebody that is staying active on a regular basis, your body is going to be more efficient at burning those sugars, using those sugars, and it's just going to be overall more efficient at keeping that pathway working the way that it's supposed to be working. So those 3 things, I mean, you'll hear us talk about them all the time, but fasting, diet, and exercise are just kind of hands down. You're going to be your go-to tools. And when we're talking about something directly impacted, like you put sugar in, it's going to directly impact this pathway, it becomes more and more important. So
you brought up exercise, and again, this will be a whole other podcast that we dive into, but exercise. Is there a specific type of exercise that you make recommendations, to the people that you're working with, that gives the biggest bang for your buck, right? Because I always look at exercise in 3 ways. You got flexibility, which is your yoga style exercise routines. Then you got your endurance exercises, your cardiovascular exercises, as you're cycling, you're swimming, you're running, you're jogging, walking. Those are your cardiovascular. And then you have your resistance exercises, those are your free weights, your bands, your body weight exercises. Those are the kind of things that are working on breaking the muscle down and then rebuilding it. Any one of those 3 categories work better in your experience and scientifically to help with those blood sugar regulations?
So blood sugar, there's been different research. So it used to think low and moderate, low intensity, low moderate, longer durations was better for blood sugar management. And it is. I would still argue that strength training, having that muscle mass build up is going to be so helpful. We talked about how muscle is one of the places that glycogen's stored. So by having that strength training, we also find, again, we'll have a whole podcast on this, but strength training is so important for weight management, weight loss and weight management. So we used to think run. That was the answer to everything. The kind of and you know, for some people,
walk it off.
Yeah, walk it off literally.
Run
and
off.
for some people and some people's body types, that's it might be. But strength training, having that muscle, that key muscular strength in the major muscle groups is going to help you not just with blood sugar, but with everything that we're talking about as far as health and wellness.
Yeah, and so you bring up a good point there, and because that's where I was hoping you were going to go. And it's not just having larger muscle mass, because what I have seen in the literature is it's about the active recovery of muscle, right? So if you just have think about a bodybuilder. If they, train for, a couple years in a row and, they win Mr. Olympia, or they're at least competing on that stage, but then they stop exercising, they're going to very quickly start to look like the Michelin Man or, a marshmallow, because, again, the cycle, the pathway is broken. So what happens is the active recovery of muscle, when you break your muscles down through resistance exercise and you've got that next day or two where you're sore, okay, that is the muscle. You've literally created micro tears in there. You've literally broken down the muscle, but by doing that, it's actively repairing itself. It's inflamed. It's inflamed. It's actively repairing itself, and by actively repairing itself, it has to draw on energy. And where is it getting that energy?
From
the glucose, stores in the musculature, in the liver. And if your glucose is under control, it's actually then going to go to fat storage. But your glucose levels have to be under control. And again, I think we're going to get further into another podcast as we start to move from transition from blood sugar to fat metabolism. Because again, how many people in our society I just want to trim up, I want to lose this gut, I want to lose I want to lose this fat, and it comes down to understanding the different metabolic pathways, sugar and fat and protein, and how they interact with one another. And when you understand that, it's easier to start making the right decisions to get that under control.
And I think we just brought up too, just such a perfect representation of what we believe, where we have one topic we said we're going to talk about blood sugar, and then how many different topics did we just interweave in there? And but that's life and that's health. It's not, we always talk about this, and that's another difference with the pathogenic model versus our model. The pathogenic model, you come in with high blood sugar, they're going to look at your high blood sugar, they're going to treat your high blood sugar.
A plus B equals C.
Yes. When you're talking about the salutogenic model, we know that it's more complicated than that. Humans are more complicated than that. Life is more complicated than that. So we are more than just a product of our symptoms. We're more than a product of our aches and pains. It's about looking at the whole person, treating the whole person. And when you do that, you're going to give yourself the best chance at a long and healthy, good quality life.
That is a beautiful place to end this podcast. Angela, thank you so much for joining me, as always. Of course, she's kind of.
I was gonna say, where else
is she gonna go? But yeah, thank you for joining us for this What the Health podcast, where anything health is fair game, brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. If any of this sounded or resonated with you, and you are in the greater Pittsburgh area, tri-state region, and you're interested in learning more, how would people get a hold of us?
Check out our website, turofamilychiropractic.com. Lots of good information on there, and you can schedule a new patient appointment directly from our website.
And with that being said, I am Dr. Dan with Angela joining me. We want to thank you so much for stopping by and helping to mold your mind a little bit on how to ask the right questions to get healthy and stay healthy for a lifetime. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
You've been listening to What the Health with Dr. Dan and Angela Turo, brought to you by Turo Family Chiropractic. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.whatthehealth.world.